Welcome to the Futurebuild podcast, where innovation, connection, and purpose come together to shape a better built environment. I'm Martin Hurn, and today we're joined by one of the most influential engineers helping to redefine what buildings can be in a net zero world. Our guest, Diego Padilla-Philipps, is the Director of Decarbonisation and Innovation for Building Structures at WSP. With a career spanning continents and landmark projects like 22 Bishopsgate, Diego has moved from traditional structural engineering into a global leadership role in sustainability and digital transformation. At WSP, Diego developed the Structures Decarbonisation Roadmap and leads the creation of their AI-powered parametric tools to transform the way we design and optimize buildings. His story mirrors the shifts the built environment must now make from legacy models to agile, climate-focused action. In this episode, we'll unpack Diego's personal journey, explore the tools and strategies shaping net zero structures, and discuss what's next for engineers, buildings, and the future of performance-led design. Let's welcome him. Absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, Martin.
Really wanted to, we always start these off by sort of finding out a little bit about you. And I think you've got a fascinating sort of journey into the built environment. You obviously grew up in a family of engineers. Tell us about that and tell us about your time in Peru.
Yes, my grandfather was an electrical engineer and my father was a civil engineer. So my life, actually, he built roads, canals and bridges across the whole Peru. So I spent a big chunk of my life on site. So we lived on site in these construction sites across the country. First toys were bricks and stones and mortar, literally. It was fascinating because for me, engineering was always there. Everything around us was engineering. And one of the things I remember the most is, every time we walked or we went through a bridge or a road or canal that my dad had built, he would point that out. And back then I used to think, how annoying. But now I feel the same. When you can see something that you've created being built, that sense of achievement and pride is just incredible.
And so then you joined WSP in 2014?
I did. So I moved to the UK in 2009. I did a master's in seismic engineering and disaster management. So the plan was always to go back to a seismic region. But London is just London, isn't it? And some of the opportunities in London are incredible. And then I joined WSP in 2014 and I've been there since.
And I was going to say, you've worked on some amazing iconic buildings. You talk about, that your dad sort of pointing out what he's worked on. Well, you only have to go into the London skyline to see some of the projects that you've worked on as well. Tell us about some of those. One of the ones that sort of sticks out to me is, 22 Bishopsgate, of course.
Yes, 22 Bishopsgate is one of those projects that defines your career, and it defines you as an engineer because you join from the early stages of concept design and you take that project through all the way to construction. And there's something fantastic about having a construction meeting every Friday at the top of the highest construction site in Europe. Looking at the views every Friday afternoon from that and seeing it change every week after week. People think sometimes that tall buildings, they are just the same floor plate repeated, but the challenge is not the same. The challenge changes as you go up on every story. It's such an incredible experience. Unfortunately, my dad didn't see it because he passed away recently, but my mum was here recently and she loved it. We went all the way to the top. She had a private tour of the viewing gallery in Spanish. She really enjoyed that.
Amazing.
Yeah, that feeling was just incredible.
We talk about complexity there. I think central London, adds another level of complexity, doesn't it, as well?
And that is one of the most fascinating things about London, the challenges that you find not only above ground, where you've got protected viewing corridors, you've got challenges with neighbors and daylight and wind. You also have all those challenges below ground. So a building like 22 Bishopsgate had to respond to the foundations for a completely different building that was there. And back then in 2014-15, the idea of reusing foundations was contested by many people, including people who were reviewing our work. So we had to go and convince every stakeholder that it was the right thing to do, to reuse those foundations, which now is exactly what everyone does and is the natural thing to do. And the challenges you find in the ground in London, from Victorian railways and sewer and Roman cemeteries, and tube lines and secret communication cables, it's responding to that is something that it doesn't happen in other contexts.
I mean, what's amazed me as well is, obviously doing my research before this podcast was the sort of the complete range of projects that you work on as well, that have completely different levels of complexity and and challenges, really. So two others being the UK Holocaust Memorial and also the Admiralty Arch basements as well. If you took those three projects in isolation, huge challenges and differences as well.
I guess they are different, but some of the engineering principles behind them are fundamentally the same. But the context is different. And those are three of the projects I've worked on. I've also, actually, the most challenging project I've worked on in my career was a tree. It is a tree in Liverpool that is nearly 1,000 years old, and it was a risk of collapse. The branches were just starting to collapse. And it had some props that were installed many years ago, and they had to replace them. So my job was to identify those and replace those props with something that could, stay there for 100 years, but also adapt as the tree grows.
Oh, wow.
And I just called it building, but it's because a tree is like a smart building. As it grows, it adapts. So it changes. When you put a support somewhere in a tree, it learns from it. The tree knows there's a support, so it grows wood in a different way. The engineering challenges are the same for a tree or for a basement or for a tall building, but the context is different. The Admiralty Arch you mentioned, it's a basement under an existing historical building, but the challenge in that project wasn't the basement itself or the building itself. It was some underground tube lines that if you excavate a basement and you relieve that pressure, then the tube lines will naturally try to move up as you relieve that pressure. So the basement had to be there, anchoring the lines into the ground. So it wasn't really a building per se. It was a boat trying to float. So you need to anchor it onto the ground. And that idea of completely flip it upside down what a building is what makes London what it is.
Yeah. So, you've been at WSP now for 10, 11 years, and you've got a fascinating current role. You're the Director of Decarbonisation and Innovation. I'd love to sort of talk a little bit about maybe how your role's evolved and actually how the role of an engineer is evolved in that time as well, and how that fits with your current role.
I think it was a natural progression to decarbonisation. Because the industry around us was changing, and I was asked to support this task back in 2019. We had the idea we realized that the majority of the emissions that we generate, they're not in our offices, they're not in our travel, they are in the buildings that we design for our clients. So that is what we had to address. If we were serious about addressing the climate emergency, we had to make an impact there. So I was asked to join this task force, and then it completely changed my career, because since that moment, then I am supporting every project across the country, reducing their carbon emissions, and globally as well. So we have now a global task force to try to do this in all the way from the US to Canada, all the way through the Middle East, Europe, into Australia and South America. And that has generated so many opportunities for change, for growth, and it's connected to the new changes that we see right now in the industry, automation and AI, because they complement each other. And it's been a reflection of the industry, but also a reflection of the current context, how the world is changing around us so quickly, and we as engineers, we need to respond to that. Sometimes you think about the way we build, and it's been the same way for like 100 years. But things around us are changing so quickly, and we need to adapt to that. So yeah, it's been a really, really great journey.
Your job title, obviously has decarbonisation and innovation. I imagine you very much see those going hand in hand. And I suppose, how do you define innovation as well? People sometimes talk too much about the sort of the tech side, but there's also a system change approach to that.
Exactly. Innovation is much more than just tech. Is that combination between enabling systems, technology, social systems, change in attitudes, etc. One of the things that I always remember is a story they told me about ice. And for me, this is what defines what I want to achieve through this innovation group. In the 1700s, when you needed to get ice in a hot place, you had to transport it from a cold place. And people made a massive industry out of this, and they made fortunes out of cutting ice from beautiful lakes in the east coast of the USA and transport that all the way to Brazil, India. The cities had ice storage facilities for ships to transport ice and store them, then to resell them. So when you were having a fancy drink in a hotel in Sao Paulo, this ice cube was so expensive, and it was restricted to the wealth. And innovation was about creating faster ships, creating insulation techniques to preserve the ice, cutting techniques to improve the speed at which you extracted the ice, storage facilities. All of that is one side of innovation, which is let's make things more efficient, let things make quicker and faster. No one realized that something else was happening around them, electricity. And then refrigeration was created, and it completely destroyed that industry, and it changed everything. I think that is the innovation we're looking for. And I'm always reminded of the ice trade. Because engineers, we love doing things quicker. We are really good at optimizing what we do. But are we not seeing the bigger picture? Do we need to do things faster and quicker, or do we need to do things different?
We're going to come on to, I think, where WSP is innovating, and doing just that. And I think, that seismic change is on the horizon. But before that, I wanted to, I think WSP has some bold ambitions, around its structural decarbonisation roadmap. And I'd love you to talk about some of the aims and maybe progress you're making towards that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we realize that the amount of carbon emissions generated from those designs that we create, they are hundreds of times greater than anything that we can do in our buildings, in our travel and operation. We are focusing on that. We just refurbished our own office, and we applied all the techniques that we tell our clients they should be using in their own offices to reduce operational energy and carbon emissions. And you know what? It's actually quite great to you feel proud that you're in an office that is using 70% less carbon emissions or energy that it used to.
Yeah.
But of course, the big impact that we can make is in the buildings that we design for others. So we have dedicated the last 5 years to try to address that in every aspect of every project in every discipline. Now, I can only speak for building structures because that's what I've been leading, but this is a commitment for every discipline. In building structures, we've made really good progress. We're measuring our carbon emissions from every design every year, and we are going down as much as we thought we should. It's a real challenge because the industry is changing so much. We had a few years ago there was a big push for cement replacements as GGBS. Then we realized that maybe that wasn't the most sustainable thing to do. So we've changed. So we're adapting. So we have to be flexible, and we are making really good progress in the direction we wanted. And yes, it's been a journey of empowerment, because as engineers now we realize that what we can influence is so important, and we need to support our clients to make those informed decisions by empowering even the most junior person to be able to challenge something that they might see that it's not the best thing for the project.
I want to pick up on that what you're talking about there about adaptation, because WSP, global company. You probably can take learnings from over 500 projects. You've got a huge amount of engineers working on those as well. Anything from UK, Dubai, Australia. Let's talk about some of how this roadmap can adapt, or some of those best learnings from a global scale, and how you take that locally.
Every country is a different context, and their journey is different. So the important thing is to understand what each client, what's the biggest driver for each of our clients and each of our contexts. And in some cases, it's about reducing carbon emissions to meet local planning constraints. In some cases, is regulation. In some cases, is specific clients asking for specific targets to be achieved. In others, is about just using less concrete, because that means that you will be saving on foundations and on column sizes and on tonnage, on cost. I think all of these aspects complement each other. They're not contradictory. So you can address the challenge of reducing carbon emissions and provide motivating the team to be more sustainable from many angles, depending on the context. But the fundamental principle is that we need to use less, and using less typically leads to less cost.
Yeah.
So that is a really powerful argument that applies to every country. That if you use less, you're going to spend less.
And do you think it's still a case that you have to sell sustainability? When we talked 5-10 years ago, it was almost you'd have to try and convince your clients that it's really important to decarbonise and sell sustainability. Is that still the case, or do you think actually now clients are valuing this?
I think it also depends on the context and the country. In places like the UK, it is implicit now that sustainability achievements lead to better products, and better products have higher margins and higher rents. That is just a given. How much do we want to embed sustainability into what we do? Well, implicitly, we should embed it everywhere. We should even go beyond sustainability. So the role of the design team is to find that balance between being sustainable, being beyond sustainable, being regenerative, and what is the best value for the client. In other places around the world, it's still a challenge. But the fundamental principle of using less is true regardless. So you can approach it in that way. By using less, you're saving materials, you're saving on cost, you're saving on program. And that resonates with everyone. I don't think we need to be selling sustainability. I think sustainability is something that is implicit, and it has to be implicit into everything we do. So by helping our clients to see that and seeing the value of it, then it is very masculine for it.
Yeah. You mentioned the design team quite a lot. What do you see the modern role of the engineer being? Because obviously you sit alongside architects, you have a huge input into the overall design and delivery of a building. How's that role evolving of the engineer?
I say the design team because every building is a multidisciplinary challenge. And one of the challenges that we see in the industry is optimization in silos, when each discipline is focused. And when I say discipline, I mean the engineering, each of them, the cost consultant, the planning team, everyone is trying to optimize things in isolation. And what happens is that this was actually one of those eureka moments that we had a few years ago. And what really enabled this journey, we created optimization engines for structures, for building services, and for facades. And we found that with a simple problem. So we gave this algorithm a challenge to optimize just one aspect of the design. And we gave it the same brief, the same building, the same location, the same area. And we ended up with 3 completely different designs. So when you wanted to optimize for daylight through the facade, the shape of the building was long, tall, skinny to get daylight through, almost like this building, through the offices at every side. When you wanted to optimize for building structures, it was low rise, wide, almost like a campus style. And that's not good for building services because of the overheating. It's not good for daylight, but it's good for structure. whereas the other one is good for daylight, but it's not good for structures because you use all concrete. And when we thought about the building services one, it was a completely different design again. And then we realized that if we optimize in isolation, and that leads to competing designs that never arrive, never converge. So the design team has to work together. So that is what I see the role of the design team and the engineer, how I see that changing. We have to be able to look at the design process, not as a linear process as it currently is, but as an iterative process. And us, the engineers and the designers and the architects, need to guide that process, find those constraints that limit the design and that drive that design until we arrive to much more informed, design based on evidence. And with AI all around us, that is going to change even quicker. So it's all about collaboration. And it's all about understanding that some of the challenges that affect one discipline affect the other one in a different way. So we have to find that balance if we really want to achieve optimal designs.
And I think that leads us really nicely into, one of the big topics I want to talk to you about, which was the use of AI in optimization and the ability that it's enabling you to not test out just 2 or 3 different designs, but now taking that into thousands of simulations. Tell us a little bit about the approach now that WSP are taking.
So one of the things that, so this example that I gave you about the 3 different disciplines, that led to us creating a multi-objective optimization tool. So we said, let's bring those 3 objectives into an engine that can test them simultaneously. What do we get? So every time that we had a building shape, it would evaluate those 3 parameters and create one dot in this 3D space. And we realized that simulation could be done in minutes. So we said, let's just, with some parameters, not a full building design, just an early stage simulation to have an idea. We said, let's test this 1,000 times. And we just let it run overnight. And there was 1,000 points in this 3D, what we call design space. Now, the design space is the equivalent of what we do in concept. What we do is we come up with 3 or 4 ideas. That is what the design team does. 3 or 4 ideas. Those 3 or 4 ideas are discrete points in this design space. With automation, with these tools, what we can do is now fill the entire surface of that design space. And sometimes the starting point of one of those options had a negative impact on something else. But now that you have the whole spectrum, you can start thinking, where should I constrain the design to achieve what I want to achieve? So it's like having 1,000 options to inform and to allow you to narrow and test things that you couldn't before because you didn't have the time, you didn't have the fees. And we're trying to apply this methodology to every project at an early stage. The future of design and engineering is it's human driven, using AI, but human driven, but it's evidence based. It's interesting because we used to create options at an early stage based on experience, based on what we did before. And that's great because that is the journey of the engineer. But that journey is limited by the experience we had. Now, we only learn from the buildings that we have created. And I remember that my first boss out of university, this was in Peru in 2007 after the big earthquake we had. And we used to inspect so many buildings we're cracking. He brought the whole team to inspect all of these tall buildings in Lima. And he said, this is your biggest learning opportunity because we are like doctors. We learn from the ill. We learn from the cracks that we see. We don't learn from the healthy buildings. We learn from these. So that always made me think about, our experience is shaped by the things that went well, but also by the things that went wrong. But it's limited by that. Now we have the ability to test thousands of different options without having to make the mistakes. And we can test them in real time and then make better decisions based on that.
And so what does this mean at a client level? What's the client, bring them on that journey?
It means that the client has the ability to test something that they couldn't before. And I'll give you a very simple example. We had a client that said, I'm struggling with this apartment design because the windows are too small. But if I and I need them bigger because I need more daylight into these apartments, or otherwise it's not going to go through planning. But if I make the windows bigger, then suddenly they start overheating because there's too much sun coming through. So I need to put air conditioning to cool down mechanically the apartment. So my variables are not converging, and it's getting more expensive. And it's this loop that just doesn't converge. What can we do? So we created this parametric tool, assessment of this specific apartment, where every aspect of the design was variable: the window size, the window thickness, the type of glass, etc. And we analyzed, daylight, heating, embodied carbon, and we found that if the client had followed that linear process of making a decision following the other, it would have led to bigger windows. And then the only thing they could do is create shade by installing some sort of mesh that just wasn't that nice, or a film that just defeats the point. Yeah. But with the ability to explore the design space using like a genetic algorithm and testing 1,000 options, we could say, now we've got these 1,000 options. Let's filter performance in each axis, and then you're left with these 10 designs. And one of them was actually, you need to make the windows smaller, but you need to change the performance of the glass to this. And it led to the same transparency, the same amount of daylight coming through, but less overheating. And this is something that we didn't have the ability to test before because we just couldn't. So it's giving clients the ability to have much more data at the beginning of the project, where it matters the most, where you can actually change something and solve it rather than waiting until it doesn't work.
So does this change the whole almost consultancy business model? I mean, I'm intrigued as well that, because that optimization, running, you're absolutely right, 1,000 simulations, can completely change your outlook of how you approach that initial design stage. And I'm interested there about how that then changes your interplay, both with the client, but also the other members of the design team. You're talking about the architects or the QSs. How, this must change that whole design process.
I think it doesn't change the principle, because every building is a multi-objective optimization challenge. I actually sometimes, when I present to university students, I tell them everything you do in your life is a multi-objective optimization challenge, even if you're choosing a holiday or a restaurant. Even if you're designing one beam, it has more than one variable and more than one performance parameter you need to achieve. So we have been doing that, but we've been doing this without the power of compute, without the resources at an early stage. And what happens is that some decisions come in at the beginning which constrain that design space, and they typically lead to a certain type of building. What we are trying to do here is, before we incorporate some of these constraints, which could be planning constraints, financial constraints, program constraints, before we incorporate these constraints, let's explore the design space, because some of these outliers might be a completely different way to do that no one would have ever thought about. And it could give you an idea to do something better. So that we start with the most efficient product, which might not be what we end up with. But currently we start with the most ambitious one, and we end up with something less, that we can afford. So it's
almost engineering is de-engineering.
Exactly. I mean, we always, we've called it the journey of disappointment. You start with this dream.
This is what you could have.
And then you end up with what you can afford. Whereas if we start with the absolutely most efficient thing, and then we start making informed decisions to increase performance, to change performance, to increase cost, to increase carbon, until we achieve the absolute best product. It's a productisation of buildings. And it does flip upside down, not only the way we look at buildings, but also how we fund the design process. Currently, we spend 10% of our fees go into concept stage, 20%, 25% into the design spaces, and then 50% into construction. because that is the nature of the industry, of how we design, how we build. But the decisions that we make at the beginning are the most influential ones. So if we flip that upside down and we spend 50% at concept stages and then 30% coordinating, and then we automate the design process, and then we automate the construction process, we will not be needing so many fees at the construction stages, and we can spend all of that at the beginning creating the absolute best value, which is exactly what happens in when you design an iPhone or when you design other products. It's about that, it's flipping that upside down.
Yeah. See, I get how this multi-objective optimization can work when you set the parameters, like, the most well-performing building, put cost into that, decarbonisation. How do you balance aesthetics? Because that's subjective.
That is it. Some of I think it's much more than aesthetics. I think architectural performance can be measured in some parameters. It could be proportions. It could be the proportions of the buildings. It could be orientation. It could be shape. It could be distance. Performance is the distance between the entrance and this specific point in the building. So when we think about aesthetics, there are many parameters which are quantifiable. And of course, there is also this subjective aspect to it, but we're not trying to remove that. We are trying to create options that respond to that subjective aspect, but they have data of the physical and parametrifiable, if that's a word, aspects that go beyond just one factor. So that when you make a choice based on aesthetics which are subjective, that choice has the data to back it up or back up all the other aspects of the design, the engineering. Traditionally or currently, when we have more than one option and the only thing that someone needs to choose is aesthetics, in many cases, they don't come with that data. And you're making a blind decision, choosing aesthetics that could then limit everything else. And then the engineering team has to be fighting against building physics, sometimes against gravity to make it work. Whereas if you have all of that data from the beginning, you can make an informed decision and say, yes, I want that specific shape because of that. That is the process. It's about bringing data and evidence to the beginning of the process.
So, I think sometimes when we talk about AI and these sort of tools, it always feels it's sort of, in the future, this is what's going to be possible, but you're using this now, and I'd love to talk about maybe some real projects that you've done this on and maybe how it's changed the design direction that you've gone in.
There's a few examples. They're mostly around building performance. There are not many related to structures just yet, which is something I'm working on. But because this is multidisciplinary and we're a multidisciplinary firm, we've been working on aspects of building performance, such as daylight and overheating. One was the one I just told you about, the optimizing that facade. And that was the first project that we did for this client. And the same client came to us and said, well, now I have a group of buildings, a master plan, and it's gone through the initial process, so I can't really change the shape of it, but I'm struggling to make them work because of the different building heights and the daylight aspects of it. We're not getting enough sun in some of the apartments. Some of them are overheating. What can we do? And we said, well, what parameters can I play with? And they said that the only ones we could was the building height. So imagine this master plan with like 15 buildings, some of them connected to each other. And then all you could change was the building height, but you have to keep the same area. So we created an algorithm to change the building heights organically. And every time you change one height in one aspect, it generated a whole high level assessment of daylight, overheating, etc. And then we said, well, then we gave some advice. We said, based on all of these 1,700 points of data, these options are the ones that are leading to less overheating. Yes. And it also led to less facade surface, which meant a saving to the client. And they saved many times the fee that we charged to do this assessment through that. But it also led to something that was really interesting. So they said, okay, let's take one building and let's analyze now apartment per apartment, not the whole building, because we're still, what we had done initially was averages on different sides of the building. And then we found that on the same side of the building, some apartments, depending on where they were struggling with the amount of daylight they were getting. And that was a fundamental change into what the apartment should be. So we went back to the client and said, these apartments, which are north facing, and they're single side apartments, they only have, windows on one side. They need to be shallower because you're not getting daylight, and you need that. Otherwise, in the winter, your heating bills will be too high. So it led to the client changing the way of their apartment layout for some north facing ground floor apartments. And he changed that, the typology of the apartment and how they do that in any building now. So it led to them making these changes that would now lead to better apartments. And as we know, we're struggling in London with apartments overheating or apartments not heating enough. And it could be that it's a change to the product that we already have, that we just need to make some tweaks to it to respond to that environment. So, yes, I think those were two of the projects we worked on.
Yeah, and so pre-AI, that level of analysis would almost be impossible.
Yes. So well, not really AI, but pre-automation.
Yeah.
You could only have 2 or 3 options. Now we have 1,700 overnight. And it's not the final process, it's not the final design, but it is a really stronger starting point to make some decisions.
And so then looking forward, what do you see or what's getting you really excited about maybe what's the next, what's possible, especially around AI automation, I think, about automating tasks?
I think that the change that we have seen in the last few months, couple of years, is only the beginning. People are starting to incorporate AI into every aspects of their lives. From an engineering point of view, the design process is such a complicated process, and it has so many stakeholders, so many steps, and every building is different. So we're definitely going to see a shift towards standardization, a kit of parts approach to buildings, which is exactly what we've been talking about. It's about productisation of buildings. But even in the bespoke aspect of buildings, I can see that you cannot really ask ChatGPT to design a building. and I've seen so many engineers taking pride in seeing how they've broken ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT to design this beam and it failed. It doesn't work. Well, you obviously kind of ask that from ChatGPT because that's not what it's supposed to do. Although maybe one day they will learn how to. But what they're really good at is connecting data. So if you plug in a science or an analysis script into it, and it uses that, you can then plug in through that natural language interface any data you want from an Excel, from an analysis model, etc. So if we focus on automation of different parts of the design process, then we can use LLMs or AI agents to connect that instead of what happens right now, which is humans. Humans connect those processes. And every time we do that, there's a source of error. There's a row in the Excel that you missed or you pasted it one row down.
Yeah.
So these tools will help us connect all these different parts of the design process and also help us identify outliers, because how many times have we, I don't know, when you have an analysis model and you think, and you didn't realize that one of the connections between a beam and a column is just not in the right place and it's not showing you the error and it's just wrong. So tools like this will help us with that. So I see that the role of automation and AI really enhancing what we do. We call it augmented intelligence. And it's going to change how we approach building design for sure.
I thought it was fascinating at the start of that. You said, things have changed in the last couple of months. We're not talking about years of development anymore. We talk about months or even weeks, and I think that's amazing. And I think you're right. The advent of, or the adoption, I think, of agents is going to be the big game changer.
Absolutely. And these agents will have tasks which are programmed within them, but very soon they will also learn how to do these tasks. And I think that's going to happen in the next few years.
How do you, maybe as an organization or as even just as an individual, stay on top of all of this development? Things are changing that rapidly. And how do you do that? And I suppose, how do you embed that in your culture as well?
When we started with parametric analysis of buildings, it happened because we had no choice. We were designing this tall building in the Middle East that was 70 stories, and every floor was different because of the massing was beautiful building. And we couldn't run the analysis model because we couldn't model it in time, because every column was at a different angle, and then the architect wanted to optimize these angles, and we didn't know how to. So they gave us a design program or a CAD program that we had never used before, and we had to learn that very quickly, and that started this journey. We can't wait for that to happen anymore. If we wait until we have to learn, it'll be too late. So what we are trying to do is embed these processes at an early stage in every project, from the super tall buildings to the tiniest one column design, so that people can find the opportunities to create their own agents, to create their own automation processes, and then scale that up. You have to drive it. Otherwise it will happen around us and we'll have no say. Now, personally, I find that really exciting because it just keeps changing. At the same time, a bit scary. Now, there's this whole new thing called AI anxiety that people are struggling with because they're seeing the change happening around them and they're scared of it. But change has always happened around us, so we just have to adapt and respond to that.
Does this change maybe what the modern or the future workforce looks like? Are you starting, this has to filter through to your recruitment then about who you're onboarding and, who are the future engineers, I suppose, and what their role or how their role changes?
I think, yes, absolutely. We are seeing that people coming through an early stage of their careers, they have different skills, skills that I didn't have. But what I am optimistic about is that when you automate engineering, when you are able to provide thousands of design options at an early stage, the role of the engineer changes from crunching numbers to providing advice, to bringing value, to learning from. If I can do twice as many projects in the same amount of time, it means I'm also learning from twice as many experiences. So I can build that. So I think the role of the engineer and the architect, it's going to be much more human oriented. It's going to be about understanding your clients' ambitions and their goals and what they want to achieve, and how you bring all this value that you have from so many projects into finding the right solution, the bespoke solution for their challenges.
So no more sort of hiding in the back room. It's going to be very much client facing.
Yes, and I can see that as a challenge as well. 50% of engineers are introverts, like myself, and it was a skill that I had to learn. I think it's a skill that everyone has to learn, because it is exactly what we are going to be doing. We're going to be client facing, design team facing, driving and bringing value on site, there in a face-to-face meeting, bringing all of that expertise. It's much more human. I think the value of human, it's going to increase, because if things are automated, then some of that value decreases. But being human, being there, having a contact with a person will be much more valuable in the future.
A lot of people talk about, especially the adoption of AI automation, about time saving. Do you see that we're going to see concept design, in a matter of days or weeks rather than months going forward?
Oh, absolutely.
No pressure on your delivery team, by the way. So.
Absolutely, and I hope it does. But it doesn't mean that the cost is reduced. It means that we are doing just things with much more effectiveness fast, and we can test more options to provide better insights. And that could also mean that some projects happen faster. Imagine if we adopt an automated approach or an AI-based approach to reviewing processes within councils, so that approvals can happen faster. It's not about less people. It's about more capability to deliver against the big pressures that we have in society right now. We really need more capability in many aspects, all the way from planning to the NHS, not only in engineering. So I think being able to reduce that, it's not a negative thing. It's actually a quite positive thing.
I suppose, how do you see, we used to talk in sort of, in decades. We're now sort of talking about what's the next 5 years going to look like. But I suppose, how's this going to impact, maybe building delivery? Are we going to see a rebirth of, there's a lot of talk about offsite. I can see agents and AI, transforming that industry and that model. What do you see the sort of the future of building delivery and design?
I absolutely agree with that, and it is happening. One of my colleagues, Dale Sinclair, has been working on the kit of parts approach to buildings, where you can standardize 80% of the building design. I see that as one of the avenues in the future. I always think about furniture. You think about how furniture was built 200 years ago. There's just one way.
Yeah.
And now you've got different types of automation within the different prices. You also have the super expensive handcrafted ones, but you also have, to address 75% of the market, you have a specific type of flat pack that is completely beneficial and addresses that challenge. I think there is certainly a move towards offsite manufacturing and kit of parts approaches to buildings, and it will be possibly the majority of things that we build will be through that. But at the same time, there is an aspect of buildings that is still bespoke and will always be bespoke, and we can now spend our time adding value those aspects rather than the 80% that can be automated.
I think with offsite, it's getting the economic model right, and I think that's been the bigger challenge at the moment, isn't it? Is that we've gone down the route of creating large factories, and unfortunately, the UK planning, especially around housing, doesn't support that model. So I think there maybe has to be a fundamental shift.
Yes. And I'm not an AI prediction expert, but I read somewhere that there is a prediction that by 2040, we will have robots with human dexterity at the price of a microwave. That's going to change everything.
Yeah. Definitely manufacturing in factories then, isn't it?
And construction. And the whole approach to health and safety will change, because the robot could install that bolt outside the facade without having to have edge protection, or it will go into its confined space without it. It will change absolutely everything. So yeah.
Well, let's get you back on in 5 years and see where we got to. We love finishing the sort of the podcast with a couple of questions really around sort of who or what sort of had the greatest impact or influence on your career. I'd love to sort of, maybe talk around, maybe who shaped your approach to engineering, innovation and sustainability sort of over your career.
So many people, definitely. For me, the first contact I had with engineering was through my father, and he was a friend, but also a colleague. I could talk to him about anything that was happening at work, and in his career, he also changed many times. So he built canals and roads for 15 years, then went into mining, construction for mining, then logistics for mining, then optimization for mining. So had to change his role more than once. So having that experience so close to home of how my role was changing, and what he saw also are the big trends of the future, the mining industry in Peru has always been so focused on environmental sustainability, etc. So he was always connected to that. So for me, that was a guide, an inspiration. But there's so many people around me at WSP as well that just have this drive to do things better. And one of them once said, really, really, in a visionary way, when I was a bit skeptic about the whole change of reducing carbon emissions and how clients will react, and what about the clients that we might lose because of this? And he said, this is the journey that is not about the clients that we might lose. It's about the clients that we will win because they believe in what we believe. And that was fantastic, really understanding what this was all about. It was about change, it's about impact. And it makes you think, when you think about a building like 22 Bishopsgate, if you think about your individual carbon emissions, there's a lot of talk right now about your individual carbon footprint. And we think about, that is around 10 tons per year, 10 tons. When you think about a building like 22 Bishopsgate, the embodied carbon for a building like that, similar, could be around 100,000 tons. So if I, as a structural engineer, are able to save 1%, that is 100 years. That's my entire life contributions in 1%. That could be a rounding error, right? That is how impactful anything that we design professionals can do. That's the impact that we can have. So yes, I think my dad and my granddad as well, showing me when I was a kid all these documentaries about tall buildings, and I always wanted to go and see them and work on them. That sort of influence is invaluable, really.
What would you say to a sort of a young engineer now, just going into university? What's some advice that you would maybe give them? Or
I would say, I don't think it's ever been more exciting to be an engineer, because we are driving change, real change. We're not doing things the way we used to. We're doing things differently, and we're growing. And the impact that you can have is so much greater than anything else you can do. But of course, it's happening quickly, and there's a lot of change around you. So you need to be prepared. If you want to stay on top, you need to be ready to adapt faster than the competition. And that's a bit scary.
Yeah, I know, I agree. And I think, it takes a certain person, doesn't it, embracing change.
Yeah.
And I think that's fine. My last question for you is really, it's a big one. If you could change one thing tomorrow about how this industry works, what would it be?
Just one thing. I think, just to keep it simple, we struggle with, going back to the ice example, we struggle to do things differently because we want them to be tested. And of course, materials need to be tested. They need to be in the code, exactly. But we designers, engineers, and architects and clients, we need to be innovative in essence. So the idea that something always comes with a risk, and that risk determines what goes forward and what doesn't. Someone needs to be able to say, that is a risk I want to take. I want to invest in this technology. I want to do this differently. And I want to use this. I say this to some clients. Let's use this project as a testing ground. Let's find some low risk elements and test different things. And then you drive this change. I think of that. It could be because we are in an industry with low margins, etc., and high risk. But that, the wanting to be the first rather than the opposite, which is what happens a lot. That's the one thing. That fundamental drive is what I would like to see more in the industry.
Okay, thank you for your time today. It's been absolutely inspiring.
No, thank you, Martin. It's been really good.
And we'll put some links to the things we've discussed in the description as well. And I'm sure if people want to find out more about WSP, it's your website, and
absolutely
get in touch.
Follow me on LinkedIn as well. I always like to connect with people and share their ideas and mine, and share my photos of buildings that I like. Thank you for this. Good.
Thank you.